Guru Nation, welcome back to another episode of Random Musings from the Clango Charles Guru. I've got some special guests on from Study OS. I've got Ellis Hiroki Butterfield and Dhruv Manchala. They're both from Study OS, which is a new startup. Both of these guys are experienced entrepreneurs. I guess a serial entrepreneur would be appropriate. In the space, I've known them from at least one company ago, if not more. They're both SOS supporters. Also, Robert Goldman is on, who is like, he's going to serve as like a real world, no BS sponsor opinion on what this surveillance does for sponsors. And I'm going to be playing myself as the no BS site owner that just had a conversation with my coordinators about having dashboards and things like this. So thank you guys so much for coming on. We need to have some discussions here because with all this new tech innovations, there's opportunity for real change, but there's also a lot of grifters in the space, and we got to separate from the two, right? It's hard to tell from an outsider. So why don't we just start with that? Like, what do you guys do, and what's the pain point that you guys are solving?
Machala, do you want to take this one this time?
Yeah. So I think in the clinical trial space, when you're running a trial, there's obviously a lot of data that's being collected, that's being generated, right? Y'all are obviously more familiar with this than we are. But clinical data, right? Operational data, safety data, regulatory information, right? Things around medications, all kinds of data, right? And this data needs to be monitored and reviewed on an extremely frequent, almost real-time basis for various purposes, right? Making sure patients are safe, making sure the trial is going on track, making sure that data quality is high, these kinds of reasons, right? Your endpoint data is trending the way you want it to, and so on and so forth. And we kind of have a background outside of clinical trials, right? And we've kind of worked with data in different industries. And in the clinical trial space in particular, the intricacy of the data and all of the relationships between the data are quite complex, and kind of doing this kind of review manually, which is kind of what happens now, right? You have basic edit checks in an EDC. You don't have any other checks for other systems at all. And then you have teams of people who are kind of not data experts looking at this data kind of on an infrequent basis, and them kind of, data managers, monitors, and so on, being the first line of defense, trying to catch all of these issues as they happen. It's just not sustainable, right? What ends up happening is you miss these kinds of issues, right? You find out only at the very end of a study, right, when you can't really correct these kinds of issues. And then your trial goes off track, all kinds of things happen. And so what StudyOS does is we are a real-time monitoring and data review solution for clinical trials. So instead of relying on your data manager to kind of look at your data once a month and kind of maybe they're going to miss a bunch of issues, or your monitor or so on, right? What StudyOS does is we kind of connect to all of your trial data as a sponsor, right? Your EDC, your labs, your other systems. We bring that data in on a kind of near real-time basis. And we identify issues in that data automatically for you, right? So for example, we can look for prohibited con meds, right? We can look for patients who have medical history conditions they shouldn't have in your trial. We can let you know if there's a sharp decline in one of your endpoints. So these are the kinds of things that we can do for you in a kind of very automated, kind of real-time, notification-based way, so that you have more control over your trial. And so you kind of have that confidence that you know what's going on, instead of always worrying at the back of your head. Did we miss something? Did someone miss something? Is there a big problem I'm not aware of?
So, I mean, a lot of sponsors might be listening and say, well, that's what our CRAs are supposed to do, right? That's why we hire the CRO. Shouldn't they have this tool? Or they say they have, most likely they're going to be like, they say they have this tool. why do we need study OS? And Robert, you're the one at the sponsor side. What say you about this? Because ConMeds, isn't that a CRA? The CRA is supposed to do that.
Dan, you bring up a great point, and you're right. I mean, to quickly say you're absolutely right is unequivocally you're right. However, there's a big however. This unfortunately is something that doesn't happen. And so I, as a sponsor, had the fortunate ability to work alongside Manchala and Hiroki in the early beta phases of StudyOS. So I have real experience working with these two gentlemen along with their entire operational team and their engineers to identify major problems with one of our, phase 3 trials that were going on. So, I'm speaking from experience, not only working with StudyOS, but what I can tell you is back to your question about aren't CRAs supposed to find this? Well, yes, but everybody's human, people are busy, and you would be blown away at the volume of issues that were detected, not only just ConMeds, medical history issues, deviations in process, deviations in protocol from instructions based on what this patient should and should not be doing, how data is being recorded, where it's being recorded, when it's being recorded, time intervals. The list goes on and on and on. And so, yes, Dan, we as sponsors expect our CRO partners to be our front lines, our eyes and ears, as it's so frequently referred to. But inherently, by virtue of being a human, things are going to be missed. The volume in which they're missed at is what's quite alarming. And that's where StudyOS, in my opinion, obviously Hiroki and Manchala are the co-founders of this company, but I view it as a surveillance system. Imagine yourself as a new parent, and you're getting ready to leave your newborn at home for the first time. Are you going to, and of course, this might be more biased towards my scenario as a small biotech. We don't have a pipeline of 100 trials or 20 trials going on at one time. So I refer to my 2 trials as my babies, right? But imagine back to the comparison I'm trying to draw here. You know, Most likely in this day and age, you're going to have a video camera somewhere within your house. Maybe it's hidden, maybe it's exposed. Either way, you have some sort of surveillance to bring yourself some sort of comfort that, hey, my baby's okay while I'm away. It's no different with StudyOS in my view. I view StudyOS as not only a surveillance system to monitor what the CRO is doing, but I'm also using it as a financial tool. Am I getting what I'm paying for? Are these monitors
So it's
doing what
really
they're
like surveying the CRO or surveying like it's not so much surveying the sites necessarily, although it could be, but it's
well,
surveying like the quality control of or quality assurance.
it's all of the above. I think it trickles down everywhere, right? It's not, I mean, again, this is one way to look at it. It's the sites, it's the CRO, it's the stakeholders within the CRO, but it's also the sponsor.
Hmm.
It's also, did we give good direction? Are there problems inherently with our protocol? Is an amendment needed? StudyOS surfaces these things in real
Right.
time so that you can make remediated decisions quickly with evidence supporting the basis of the decision you're going to make. If I'm going to go down the amendment pathway, I don't have to tell you how many steps there are and contractual implications, vendor implications, timeline implications, costing implications that are involved with an amendment. But StudyOS can surface these things quickly so that I can pivot during enrollment to say, okay, well, and somebody might be saying, well, Robert, there's already tons of data out there, some IRTs,
Oh,
capture,
there's
exclusion, inclusion.
IRT, EDC, I mean, ePro, E everything. This actually leads me to a conversation I had. I had a podcast similar to this, but except instead of 3 experts from the tech space and one from the sponsor side, it was my new coordinators. The 7 months experience was the most one, and then
Right.
the most experience in the 4 months for Luis. And we were talking about like what are some things that you wish were different? Because oftentimes the outsider expertise while they already understand like the fundamentals is important. And they said like some dashboard that we can see IRT, EDC, SUSAR. I mean, there's like 10 different vendors for a study at a site.
Hmm.
If we had one place to see all this stuff, like the important info from all of it, like right
Right.
now, if you want to see what informed consent version you're supposed to use, log into your IRB, right? If you want to know, did you log in the latest investigation of product, log into your IRT. If you want to
Hmm.
see the temperature of the IP, you log into your temp stick. If you want to see queries, I mean, it just goes on forever. Why
Right.
not have one dashboard
Yeah,
where
I
you
mean,
can just see all this stuff? Like, what a concept.
I'd love to offer another perspective on kind of what both of you are saying. So, I think, yes, yes, CRAs should be doing this, and yes, everyone has a responsibility to be looking out for these kinds of issues, and they're as different stakeholders. But I think what you're pointing out and what your coordinators are pointing out is that the stark reality is that clinical trials have gotten a lot more complex to run in the last 10 years. Not only has there been an exponential growth in the number of studies, but the actual studies themselves are more complex. There are more systems, there are more data points, there are more procedures. Every study's basically all of them are multi-site studies now, multi-site trials now. And so, the way I would like to think about our product is, yes, it's the surveillance system, but it's also like we're trying to cut the study team a break here and say, look, maybe 80 to 90% of this we can kind of automate. And so we can have people focusing on what people are really good at, right? Which is, you know, thinking about the critical strategy of, does it make sense to do an amendment now? How can I improve the relationship with my sites? Is this a training issue? Those are all questions that a machine's not going to answer for you, but it really helps to actually have that information. And to your point about dashboards, you're absolutely right. I think putting everything in one place is absolutely critical. I mean, in and of itself, it is valuable. We do that for the folks that we work with, but I agree. Every stakeholder should have some kind of mission control for themselves, and we aspire to do that. But yeah, I totally agree.
If anyone wants to do this, like hit me up because this is like I think it's a no-brainer. You just got to get all the vendors to play nice with each other. Supposedly it's open source. I don't know all that stuff. You
Oh,
guys know the
no way.
API,
Actually, I have to comment on that. I'm so sorry.
open API.
No, no, this industry is like actually the worst at that. Like no one makes a not only is like no one open API,
The
but the people
EDCs
who
are
have
they're not.
APIs are going to charge you for it. I'll just give you some
Mm,
context. Like if you go to like any startup in any like Y Combinator, Techstars startup who like has an API, like all of them free to use, right? Unless
yeah,
you're like really maxing out on the API, basically they're just like, yeah, integrate with us. But in this space, one, the APIs probably don't exist. And if they do, they probably don't have documentation. And if they do exist and they have documentation, they'll charge you for it anyway.
wow. So that we
Yeah.
found the issue, the one of the main issues I think with this space. I hear the EDCs are at least the big ones are open. I'm not gonna name names, but from what I've heard, they have open
Open is
API.
a strong word.
It's theoretically open. How about that?
It's theoretically open, all right.
All right, that's good enough.
Yeah,
So
no,
can you
I'll
get do
add
you
one more thing.
yeah,
Just going back to the thing about surveillance, right? I want to be clear that the primary goal of a tool like this, of StudyOS, is not to help people point fingers more effectively, right? But kind of everyone is on the same team trying to make the study succeed. And we want to help with that. I'll give you one example from one of our customers, right? So we can flag prohibited, con meds and kind of prohibited kind of medical history conditions that subjects have, right, who have been enrolled in the study. And we were actually able to flag somebody who had a prohibited medical condition, right? But we flagged them, when they were enrolled, but before they were randomized, right? And so we were actually able to help, get the subject out of the trial before randomization, right? That's a win for the sponsor, but also a win for the site because you don't want that issue to be caught at day
right,
of. It's much better if it happens now. So it's not
right.
about, finger pointing, but I think this kind of helps everybody.
No, that's a
Oh,
good thing.
Yeah, and it serves as a training point, right? So you come back in and you're able to, okay, where did we go wrong? It serves as a training point. I agree, absolutely, Manchala. This is not, and even from a sponsor perspective, it's not to say, oh, the CRO is doing good or bad or anything like that, but it enables us to catch it in as close to contemporaneous as possible And then you triage the situation. You know, is it a trigger visit? Do we need additional on-site time? Do we need a roundtable? Do we need a kappa? Do we need a different resource to go in and assist? Is that particular CRA overworked? So it helps us kind of work on the same side of the table, but at the same time, you know, it also gives oversight ability to the sponsor to make sure deliverables are happening as they should. But to Manchala's point, he's absolutely right. Sites, the last thing you want are ineligible patients enrolled in a study, especially if you're a high enrolling site. You know, so it gives some sort of comfort to sites as well. Dan, you're a site owner, you know,
Yeah.
knowing that your data is above reproach and that all your patients undoubtedly meet eligibility based on the medical records that were made available to
Oh
you,
yeah.
you
And
know.
the training opportunity alone. And I like
Exactly.
real world examples. And so I've also noticed as a site owner, there are different types of issues. Like there's eligibility issues, which a lot of sites make early on in the study that you learn, you train yourself out of it. Like, oh, okay, we shouldn't have screened this person to begin with because of this medication. I see those as like the more simple ones, but there are systemic issues that the sponsor has not thought of, mainly around all this influx of new data. So here's a real world example. We had a patient that was going to randomize for a study. Like we took him all the way through randomization visit, and he failed on a diary on a patient reported outcome at the site because he put that he was too depressed, where he claims he didn't know what he was doing and he would like to redo it. But if we were to look at his diaries every day, because they're daily diaries leading up to the rando, we would have seen he was trending down as far as his depression. So somebody could have reached out to him from the site and said, "Hey, you know what? Your PHQ-9 is trending down. Are you feeling okay? What's going on?" "Oh, I'm going through some stuff. That's why I'm depressed." But I'm not actually depressed, but of course, I'm a human, so I'm going through like a bad period. Okay, we wouldn't have randomized that day. We would have picked another day, right? But no one's looking at the site because we're not necessarily paid to look at their diaries every day. We're just paid to look that they're doing it. We're
Hmm.
not paid to analyze like what are they actually putting.
I think
And
you point out
and
a really. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say there's so many things like this because sponsors hear, yes, let's get more data points. Yes, good idea. Yes. So then they're throwing all these extra data points at sites who are basically getting paid the same, and we're really only paying attention at the visit, not
Right.
when the patient's at home, because we expect that some flag is gonna alert us, some, like IRT is gonna send a warning.
Let's collect
No,
data and then not look at it. I feel like that happens a
Right.
lot. Um,
exactly,
but I think
exactly.
that actually you point to a category of problems that I think is particularly pernicious, which is just longitudinal data, which is anything that involves like a trend over time. People, at least, I think it's probably one of the biggest gaps when it comes to data monitoring in the industry. One is like we don't make this readily available across the entire study team. Like it might be in one patient profile system somewhere if you happen to be paying a lot for that. But for the most part, edit checks aren't going to be looking at things that change over time either. They're basically on the field level. And so anything that has to do with multiple fields at once, anything that has to do with trends, pretty much no one's really being alerted to that. So I
Yeah,
totally agree.
sleep at
And
the wheel. That's what I call it. And we like real world examples. So thank you for the one, Manchala, about the prohibited med. Do you guys have like, what's like the pitch, like the elevator pitch, like maybe from a real world example where you get a sponsor for like a minute and you give them a real world case study, like that, like catches them off guard and they're like, yes, we need this.
Well, we have a 100% track record of finding ineligible patients based on medical history and 100% track record
You're
across
batting 1,000.
several different therapeutic areas, right? Big sponsors, small sponsors, different CROs, right? That's actually something that's pretty easy for us to do, and it's pretty challenging for the sponsor to do traditionally. So that's a really easy one.
you can layer onto that. You can say we have a 1,000 batting average. And we like always find it before the CRA. So we actually just worked on a study for a top 60 pharma, global phase 3. And yeah, I think I'm not going to go into the numbers, and I won't disclose that, but yeah, we definitely caught a very, very large chunk of ineligible
Well, that's
patients.
not surprising. I mean, algorithms don't sleep, CRAs sleep.
Algorithms don't sleep, baby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the reality.
Yeah, I mean it's that, and you want the systems to think the way humans do. I think that's also a big disconnect, right? You got a lot of these systems, and they're like super simple. They're like, this isn't how a person would look at this data. So you gotta have to have like the system look at the same data the same way a person would. You want to like you want to make sure that it's the medic like if for example if the medication is it stable, right? Well, first you got to check if it's not allowed, and then you got to go check like what is it? Is it twice a day? Is it PRN and so on? So you gotta have the same thinking pattern that a person would have, and then you have to approach your own system that. Yep. But yes, you're right. AI doesn't sleep.
The
Yeah, it
other
They run
doesn't
all the
sleep.
time.
pitch wise is, I'm sure sponsors are wary of long implementation cycles without kind of a clear ROI and things like that. But we offer a free data audit, right, to any sponsor who wants to work with us, right? So from the sponsor's point of view, this is very, very low effort. You give us a one-time snapshot of your data. You give us your protocol and kind of other key documents, study documents. And in 2 weeks, we run your data through our kind of like suite of algorithms, and we show you kind of where your data is. So it's a one-time, low risk, low effort, free kind of analysis of your data. And then if you want that, and if you want more, and if you'd like that on a regular basis, then you can kind of work with us.
Do you plug in like the EDC, the IRT? What do you plug in?
Everything.
IRB, like IRB portal? Are you guys
Actually,
looking at
that
like
that
reg documents and stuff or
not
no?
yet. Not
Okay.
yet. We will, but not yet.
So just like
Right
the
now.
actual clinical part.
Most of it's clinical data right now and some
Uh,
operational data.
okay. And how do you get like, because the sites, oftentimes the sites don't even have the records, right? Like they'll give a verbal report on their source of the meds the patient take. Then they'll randomize the patient and then they get the record and oh, the patient forgot to mention that one. That's exclusionary. That's prohibited. Like, how do you guys get that if the even the sites don't get it?
Well, we can't read minds yet, but we're right now we're only working with data kind of in the EDC, right? So there is one
Okay.
kind of a time delay right now before the data is entered, right? And then if there's something in the source or something the patient hasn't talked about, we don't have that yet. But kind of, we're early on in our journey, but as we think about the problem more and more, a lot of these issues would be great to kind of address more upstream, right? For example, Dan, what if you knew before you entered any data whether you were about to enroll a patient who was ineligible and your coordinator had missed that, right? I
Oh
think
yeah,
that's way
huge,
better
huge.
than catching it 2 weeks later after the subject's enrolled.
Hmm.
And so one thing we would like to do at some point is kind of make those tools available at the site level, right? Kind of making it easier to enter your data, going from your source into the EDC, maybe even going from paper source straight into the EDC, and kind of issuing all of these warnings and alerts at that point before the patient is enrolled and kind of at the point where the action really needs to be taken. You want to avoid this whole feedback loop of like it takes 2 weeks for the data to be entered, then it takes some time for the sponsor to review it, then the sponsor kind of gives instructions to the CRO goes back to the site. What if you could just equip the site to make those decisions themselves, right? So we'd love to get to that point.
Yeah, I think I mean, I think a lot of the key is in the source of the sites. And as more sites switch to electronic, it might be easier, provided that those e-source vendors play nicely, which we know from our rookie that that's not the case. But
Well, actually, I think on the eSource side, we're a little bit better, and
oh,
we do
okay,
have we do have on our roadmap some integrations with eSource vendors.
okay. I think that helps a lot. I also think there's technology coming that can get paper source also like run it through a LLM of sorts and um, get some data out of it that is usable by vendors like yourselves. So, do you think there's a like a future where this stuff kind of works flawlessly, or do you think this is just gonna cause more problems?
Do I think that clinical trials will ever be run flawlessly?
Yeah, with all this AI, I mean, algorithms don't sleep. Like, The way I see it, you'll still need sites because
Yeah,
they're the ones that have direct access to patient. I mean, no matter how good our tech is, if
but
a
human
patient
beings are still
says
writing these protocols.
humans are writing, but like no matter how good
They're
we
still
have,
shipping out these IP. I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
yeah,
I mean,
they are. But like no matter how good these systems are, ultimately it boils down to a patient agreeing to come in, and usually that means a coordinator is convincing them and keeping them in. So I don't see tech helping that. Maybe helping with like, hey, birthday reminders, which no one's done, by the way. It's amazing to me. No e-source vendor has yet made an easy way for sites to tell like automated happy birthday text to patients. Creo, hit me up, man. Like we got to do this. We're trying to figure out ways to do it ourselves. But like aside from that, the data, right? Making sure eligibility, even regulatory, like making sure we're using the right version of the protocol and everyone's trained on it. Making sure we're using the right informed consent version. That's a huge finding. When an informed consent version gets amended, not getting that signed at the first opportunity, it might be one of the most common protocol deviations. And it's a
mm,
serious one too. I think
right.
data, I think tech can help all those things provided we get a dashboard of sorts. But do you think this ultimately makes trials more complex? Because the temptation will be, okay, now we have all these vendors doing all this. We can make the IE criteria even stricter and squeeze more juice from that orange. And like this would be a never ending thing. Like we'll eventually have trials for like two people.
I mean, I think we need to put Rob on the hot seat for that kind of thing.
Yeah, let's put Rob
Yeah.
on the hot seat
Take
for
these
You
decisions.
know, yeah, so no problem. I mean, I'll take a stab at it. I don't think, clinical trials will ever be flawless ever, Dan, no matter
Why?
what. Well, because the data itself, the data is one aspect, right? But to your point, Dan, if a patient's not showing up for their visit,
Yeah.
or the coordinator is not engaging the patient for retention, or the patient's not compliant with their IP, or if the patient doesn't understand what they're reading, all these outputs that go in that are the data points that StudyOS are ingesting and analyzing, it's not going to solve anything, right? They're just going to be flagging things that we kind of already knew. Oh, this patient read it wrong, or this patient was distracted by people talking. Right? Or,
Yeah.
this patient brought in a full bottle or, a full vial, or their whatever device they're using, whether it's a pill, an injectable, it is not even used. The seal is still intact, right? So then you go back to the ePro, if there is an ePro, or you go back to the scales. All that data they generated in between those visits are still going to be, it's not value add. So AI will never fix or tackle those compliance issues outside of the presence of the clinic. That's where your coordinators, your relationships, trustworthy patients that really want to see an outcome are going to, thrive with the help of StudyOS. In my opinion, I think StudyOS provides value, and I don't think they're going to complicate things because the system's already complicated enough. I think what StudyOS is doing, to Hiroki's point, is that it enables the stakeholders to spend more time on protecting the grassroots reason of what CRAs are supposed to be there in the first place. Number one, protecting the welfare and safety of that patient. And number two, data integrity, right? So it
Yeah.
allows them to go back to those grassroots reasons on focusing on the patient safety and then leaning on a tool like StudyOS to reassure I didn't miss any safety signals. I didn't miss any trends in the data that I should have caught to at least bring to the PI's or site's attention.
To me, that's the future is the trends.
That's
Following
I
those
I
trends, at
agree.
least for the sites. I mean, for
Hmm.
sponsors, they
Hmm.
have a lot of other things to worry about, but
Well,
for
us too
sites,
though, Dan. Us too.
yeah.
Everything else, look, but see, Dan, this is the thing. Like, it's just as important to us as it is to the sites,
Hmm.
because if I'm able to collate trends, which I can with StudyOS from a sponsor level perspective, from a study level perspective, I'm able to, do I need to call a DMC meeting? Do I need to go to a DSMB, an ad hoc DSMB board meeting? Should the study be stopped? Should it be continued? Should it be changed? Is the dosing right? Is there something in the investigator brochure that should be, updated now because we're seeing a lot of something surface that we never saw in phase two, or vice versa. So StudyOS is able to give us this informational trending, analyses, and that's where we find it very valuable. But back to your question, where Manchalo put me in the hot seat, I don't think anything's ever going to be flawless in our industry. But I think it's going to give us an ability to be more effective, and it's going to enable CROs, sites, and sponsors to utilize resources in a much more effective manner, where VPs and directors can focus on developmental strategy and the vision of getting the product to an NDA, versus putting out fires every single day and answering questions and, missing out on interactions of training opportunities and things like that. Um,
That's
that's
the
where I
big
think a lot
stuff.
of it, yeah, that's
That's
the
the big
big
stuff.
stuff.
I think
Yeah.
another one is it sounds like why would you need that? It's the same reason why, I mean, same reasoning why, hey, why do you need, I thought we have CRAs to check for eligibility, is having a AI help desk for the coordinators, like to ask stupid questions. Because look, Robert, not every coordinator is the site owner. Like, I don't care. I'll ask people anything I feel like because I need to know, and I'm not worried about losing my job. But coordinator, like who are employed, they're like, hey, I'm a little worried about asking this question. I think it's stupid. So I'm just gonna figure it out on my own. And what they end up doing is trying to read the protocol, trying to interpret the protocol. Whereas if we had like a vendor provide like an AI site helper, right? Hey, ask any stupid questions here. That way you're not embarrassed. I think that would go a long way, provided that it's validated and it's actually accurate, because there's there's a lot of liability there. But what do you guys think of this? Can StudyOS pull this off?
This specific request, or helping
Yeah,
coordinators in general?
no, this specific one. Like, give me like a little thing where I can ask, hey, ask me anything about this protocol. And it's like a little AI helper, like Clippy used to be on Word, right? Well, I'm gonna go in there and ask them stupid things I'm embarrassed to ask my Siri.
It's funny that you asked that. We deal with the same challenge, right? Even though we're building software, right? We still need to understand our sponsors' protocols. And so we're constantly looking at the
Yeah,
protocol. And the same way y'all are looking at it, where we're scrolling down to the table of contents and then kind of clicking to the section we want to go to, or we search for something and there are 50 different results and we keep going down until we find the one we want. So we have that same painful workflow. And we actually did a project for a sponsor recently where one of the things involved was they had these massive, 500-page documents, which were just all the source, all the kind of hospital records and things like that for various patients. And their workflows involving, people at the CRO and sponsor side going through that document manually and, trying to do something with that. And we very quickly prototyped something where we could convert all of that into text and then be able to search through that the way you would, search on Google or things like that. And it was quite convenient, and it's definitely something that we could do pretty easily for protocols as well, and something we have been thinking about for ourselves and for kind of the sponsors who use our
yeah,
product and at
good.
some point
Just a
put
little
in.
bit more context there. They're dossiers that include like all the lab information and the ER visit, because like these are like hospitalized patients, and so they're very very long texts. And for the adjudication committees and the medical monitors, they need to be able to extract specific information. But like these don't have tables of contents, right? They're basically just PDF scans of hundreds and hundreds of different medical records. So that's certainly thing. But I will say this again. You can't, if there's a mistake though. Unfortunately, humans make mistakes. We had a thing where we were flagging a bunch of medical history conditions based off of the fact that when we interpreted the sentence, there was no comma in a one spot, And so we interpreted it as like, it meant one thing, and they're like, oh, and then we were like, hey, by the way, we flagged all these issues. And they're like, why do you flag all the? Well, because of IE,
Right.
number 4 or something like that. I don't remember the number was. And they're
Commas
like,
sometimes are very
yeah,
important.
and they're like, oh, sorry, that was our bad. This is a grammar mistake. I was like, well, you know.
I saw a
So
good meme on X about that, but I won't mention it here because it's family friendly right now. But yeah.
Gotta wait for a guru after nation
Guru after
after
Guru After
dark.
dark.
Dark. Guru
Guru
After
after
Yeah.
Dark.
dark. We can go. We can do that. No, guys. I mean, let's face it. Like at the end of the day, it's these are just tools. Like it's not just you. Maybe. I mean, how do you respond to that? Like, oh well, CROs are also working on these things too. Like, why would we need study OS? Like, what?
They're not.
What?
They're not. They're not. I know they're not. We talked to
They're
all of them.
they're supposed to be, no?
I mean, CROs are CROs are good at hiring and maintaining people in their organizations. They're good at training people. They're good at allocating resources. Like they are organizations built on understanding the regulatory requirements. They're good at staffing people for studies. They're good at identifying sites. Like they have things that they're good at, but developing specific technologies to enhance operational efficiencies is not something that they're particularly good at. Yeah, there's like a couple of them here or there who have maybe
But not yet. But like ultimately, like IRT, Zcoa, like they all ended up acquiring them or developing them in house. Do you think that's gonna continue with this kind of tech? Like I guess, for lack of a better word, surveillance tech or trend monitoring or whatever you want to call it.
I mean, possibly. I think there's like a cycle to all of these things, right? Where they're never going to be the ones who develop the product initially. They're going to like for most of these cases too. You're discussing acquisitions, right?
Right, right.
And so again, it's like they don't staff in house the teams necessary to build these products, or maintain them for that matter. They do acquire them later on.
Yeah. The
But
thing that sucks when they acquire is that they stop innovating, right? So then they become like
yeah.
crappy tools. Like they used to be good when the founders were running it, and now some CRO bought it. It's good enough now. You know, they don't innovate anymore. And we see real issues in studies because of crappy e-diaries or crappy whatever, because they usually get bought up and then that's where the innovation stops.
Yeah, I do feel like there's another systemic issue with just, people want to de-risk their studies, and that makes sense. But at the same time, I think that sometimes the mentality of like I want to de-risk it by using known things is actually sometimes more risky, because it's like a lot of times some of the best options available to you are going to be from smaller companies who are going to do everything that they can to make sure that you succeed.
Right.
But if your like default is, oh well, this is like a top 10 CRO, and like if I put it in their hands, it'll be fine. Is I mean, for men, for if you're like Pfizer, sure, maybe that's fine, right?
Yeah.
Because you have an entire enterprise of like people who are going to be catching issues on your behalf, and so even if they drop the ball, you have all of that infrastructure available to you. But for a lot of smaller organizations, they don't have that, and so
Right.
working with these kind of organizations is actually, I think, sometimes more detrimental.
I agree. It's just you're less likely to lose your job if you pick like a known vendor versus a startup, right? Should something go wrong, you're at least safe because you have the confirmation bias of so many other people. I guess social proof. Look, everyone uses this vendor, so that's why I use them. I mean, you can't fire me for that decision. But if I hire like StudyOS, that's kind of a risky move on our on that vendor
Technology
procurement.
aside, though, I mean, like if you look at a lot of bigger players now are insourcing a lot more these days, and I think that that's a direct result of wanting to maintain quality and control internally.
Hmm.
And so I think that is just a larger trend of people recognizing that they need to have a bit more control over the execution of their studies, and that involves not just hiring internal staff to man certain functional areas, but it also involves actually investing and building infrastructure across things like data management, clinical operations, and so on,
I
with
like
like
that.
tools and technologies. So,
And the other thing is, you know, it's true that there are going to be certain vendors and products that you're not going to get fired for using, whether it works out or not. but that's going to be more at larger and kind of more established companies that don't have everything on the line. To go back to something that Rob had said earlier, when it's your first asset, it's your only asset, and the whole company is going to fail if this doesn't fail. It's a newer company. I'm pretty sure you're going to be on the hot seat if something doesn't work out, regardless of whether you used metadata or some no-name vendor, right? So there's always that, that rising tide of the smaller biotechs who are going to have that attitude where they care about, the quality and the outcomes over, the established vendors, because everything's online.
Yeah, and I think there's like definitely going to be a need for more discussion around this because this is just starting out. Like you guys are on the forefront, some of the pioneers of this kind of stuff, specifically on the sponsor side. But also, I think it trickles down into the site side. So everybody go follow Hiroki, Robert, and Manchala. Manchala with the hat game is on point. I gotta say, that's amazing hat right there. Um, Everybody like, subscribe, comment, share. Go follow, connect with everyone. Catch you guys later. Bye bye.